In other news, Labour have decided to cancel local elections because Reform are going to win all of them. Expect to see a lot of words explaining this and a lot of wiggling and a lot more of Angela Rayner with her terrible pronunciation and her ginger growler out all over the place. First up, a brilliant picture emerges of Trump, Elon Musk, Nick Candy and, oh yes, Nigel Farage. The power of these guys together is simply enormous. It will make Nigel Farage unbeatable. He will be Prime Minister of Great Britain by 2027, if not...
To get me and Dyson and all the investment bankers, she could have used a sniper's rifle. What she actually used was a blunderbuss, and she's hit everybody here. Now, I believe DEFRA knows they've made a mistake. We've now got to convince Rachel Reeves that she's made a mistake.
Angela Rayner, the fiery deputy leader of the Labour Party, has found herself under fire from not one, but two outspoken critics, Katie Hopkins and Jeremy Clarkson. In a double-barreled attack, Hopkins accuses Labour of betraying pensioners and abandoning the working class, while Clarkson exposes glaring contradictions in the party's housing policies. These critiques are not just political potshots, they're seismic revelations that could reshape public opinion and Labour's standing in British politics. If you're tired of political spin and want to hear the unfiltered truth, hit that subscribe button, and stay with us as we unravel the explosive claims shaking Westminster to its core. Katie Hopkins' expose on Angela Rayner. Katie Hopkins has never been one to mince words, and her recent tirade against Angela Rayner and the Labour Party has set the internet ablaze. At the heart of Hopkins' critique is what she calls Labour's callous betrayal of the UK's most vulnerable citizens, pensioners. According to Hopkins, Labour's decision to cut winter fuel allowances has left millions of elderly Britons in peril as they face rising energy costs during a brutal winter. This government, Hopkins declares, has effectively written off pensioners. They've paid in all their lives, and now Labour wants them to fend for themselves with nothing but broken promises and hollow rhetoric. Hopkins backs her claims with heartbreaking personal stories from pensioners struggling to make ends meet. One elderly woman reportedly told her, "I've stopped turning on the heat because I can't afford it. What am I supposed to do? Auction off a kidney?" But Hopkins doesn't stop at winter fuel allowances. She takes aim at Labour's broader handling of working class issues, particularly tax hikes that have disproportionately affected struggling families. Starmer and Rayner, she argues, promised not to raise taxes, a commitment many working class voters took as gospel. Yet under their leadership, taxes have increased, leaving families with less money for essentials like food and rent. Hopkins also accuses Labour of undermining free speech by attempting to silence controversial figures like Nigel Farage and Lee Anderson. According to her, banning voices of dissent doesn't strengthen democracy, it weakens it by shutting down tough but necessary conversations. Hopkins' blistering critique paints a picture of a Labour Party that has not only failed to deliver on its promises, but has also alienated the very people it claims to represent. It's a damning indictment that has sparked outrage among voters and intensified calls for accountability. Jeremy Clarkson's critique of Labour's housing policies. Jeremy Clarkson, known for his sharp wit and no-holds-barred commentary, has also turned his focus to Angela Rayner and Labour's housing policies, delivering a scathing critique that has left the party scrambling for answers. At the center of Clarkson's attack is Labour's ambitious promise to build 1.5 million new homes. While the proposal is presented as a cornerstone of the party's plan to address the housing crisis, Clarkson dismisses it as impractical and riddled with contradictions. One of Clarkson's most incendiary claims is that 5 out of every 7 of these new homes will be allocated to immigrants, a figure Labour has vehemently denied. But Clarkson insists his numbers are drawn directly from Labour's own documents, creating a cloud of confusion and mistrust among voters. Whether true or not, the accusation has sparked heated debates about the prioritization of housing for immigrants versus British citizens. Adding fuel to the fire, Clarkson highlights the glaring contradiction in Labour's messaging. On one hand, Angela Rayner has stated that the UK's existing housing stock is sufficient to meet demand. On the other, Labour has committed to an aggressive building plan that Clarkson argues ignores more practical solutions, like rehabilitating vacant properties. If we already have enough housing, Clarkson asks, why aren't we fixing what we've got instead of pouring billions into projects that may never materialize? Clarkson also points out a troubling trend under Labour's leadership: the rising number of immigrants being housed in properties originally intended for the homeless. He accuses Rayner of evading these concerns during interviews, offering vague and dismissive answers instead of concrete solutions. Critics argue that Labour's failure to balance immigration with domestic housing needs has left many Britons feeling ignored and unsupported. For Clarkson, Labour's housing policies epitomize a broader problem: a lack of coherence and strategic thinking. He argues that the party's focus on political expediency over pragmatic solutions is not only ineffective, but also alienates voters desperate for real change. The public fallout and Labour's leadership crisis. The combined critiques from Katie Hopkins and Jeremy Clarkson have unleashed a wave of public discontent, placing Labour's leadership under intense scrutiny. Angela Rayner, once hailed as a relatable voice for the working class, now faces accusations of being out of touch with the struggles of ordinary Britons. Polling data shows a sharp decline in public trust for Labour, with voters increasingly skeptical of the party's ability to deliver on its promises. Viral petitions demanding greater accountability have gained traction, reflecting widespread frustration with what many see as a government detached from reality. Keir Starmer's unwavering defense of Angela Rayner has only deepened the divide. Despite mounting criticism, Starmer has described Rayner's handling of issues like housing and immigration as competent and merely aligned with Labour's vision. This stance has drawn backlash from both party members and voters, who view it as tone-deaf and dismissive of valid concerns. Labour's credibility is further eroded by what critics call a pattern of broken promises. Tax hikes, unfulfilled commitments to pensioners, and controversial housing policies have fueled a growing sense of betrayal among working-class families. For many, the gap between Labour's rhetoric and reality has never been wider. The fallout isn't confined to public opinion. Within Labour's ranks, dissent is brewing. Party insiders have expressed frustration with the leadership's inability to address pressing issues or connect with voters. Some MPs fear that if these controversies remain unresolved, they could spell disaster for Labour in the next general election. Meanwhile, figures like Katie Hopkins and Jeremy Clarkson continue to amplify these criticisms, resonating with a growing base of disillusioned voters. Their voices, though polarizing, tap into a deep well of frustration that Labour cannot afford to ignore. Reform UK and the rise of the opposition. As Labour's leadership falters, opposition parties like Reform UK are gaining momentum. Figures like Nigel Farage have seized on Labour's missteps, framing them as evidence of a political establishment that has lost touch with the public. Farage's rhetoric, though divisive, has struck a chord with voters who feel ignored by the mainstream parties. Reform UK's rise in the polls reflects a growing appetite for change. Disillusioned voters are flocking to parties that promise to prioritize their concerns, from affordable housing to energy costs. This shift in political allegiances signals a potential realignment in British politics, with traditional party loyalties giving way to a more fragmented and unpredictable landscape. Can Labour rebuild trust? For Labour, the stakes couldn't be higher. With the next general election looming, the party faces an uphill battle to rebuild trust and reconnect with its base. This will require more than just damage control. It demands a fundamental reassessment of Labour's priorities and messaging. Addressing the housing crisis with practical, actionable solutions could be a starting point. Rather than focusing solely on new construction, Labour could pivot to rehabilitating vacant properties and streamlining planning processes. Similarly, reversing cuts to winter fuel allowances and delivering on promises to pensioners would go a long way toward restoring public faith. Most importantly, Labour's leadership must demonstrate a willingness to listen. The critiques from Hopkins and Clarkson may be harsh, but they reflect genuine frustrations that cannot be dismissed. By engaging with these concerns and offering concrete solutions, Labour has an opportunity to turn the tide. The revelations from Katie Hopkins and Jeremy Clarkson have put Angela Rayner and the Labour Party under an unforgiving spotlight. These critiques have not only exposed weaknesses in Labour's policies, but also highlighted the growing disconnect between the party's leadership and the public. As disillusionment with mainstream politics grows, the demand for accountability and transparency has never been greater. Whether Labour can rise to the challenge remains to be seen, but one thing is clear: the road ahead will be anything but easy. What do you think about these explosive allegations? Is Labour losing touch, or can they turn things around? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more updates on this unfolding political drama.